Welcome to the Healing Broken Families podcast. I'm Barbara Pointe, and I host conversations on divorce, parental alienation, high conflict personalities, and trauma. Let's begin. Today, I am so delighted to be sharing a space with a very special woman who contacted me. She described herself as a nervous system educator for cycle breaker moms. So I got really curious and called her back. And this is how today we are in conversation with the amazing Christa Bevan. Christa Bevan is a dynamic self-care coach, and she supports mothers breaking cycles of generational trauma. She uses tree, tension, and trauma releasing exercises, as well as a host of other modalities. But one thing for sure, it's Christa's passion to support women on the journey of mothering radically. Welcome, Christa.
Thank you, Barbara. Excited to be here with you.
Yes, it's such a really beautiful topic, intergenerational trauma or inherited family trauma. I'm excited to see what emerges.
Me too.
Great. So I thought we'd start off with a little quote from Mark Wolynn to sort of frame the conversation for intergenerational trauma. Mark Wolynn is the author of a book that I highly recommend, and Christa's really familiar with it. It Didn't Start With You: How Inherited Family Trauma Shapes Who We Are and How to End the Cycle. Mark Wolynn is also the director of the Family Constellation Institute in San Francisco, and he really is the world leader in the field of inherited family trauma. And he says one thing is clear: life sends us forward with something unresolved from the past. And until we uncover the actual triggering events in our family history, we can relive fears and feelings that don't belong to us, unconscious fragments of a trauma. And we may think that they're ours, but they're not. So just begin with that amazing quote from Mark Wolynn and invite you to speak to us, Christa, about inherited family trauma.
Yeah, well, as you just, pointed out in that quote from Mark, that it's really about these things that end up sort of on our plate that aren't actually ours, right? So these traumas, these wounds, these unhealed parts of our family that have been passed down, oftentimes through a family line, right? So we tend to think of our parents, but it can be more than just our parents. It can be our grandparents and our great-grandparents. And it's these things that they have encountered in their lives that for whatever reason, they weren't able to process or handle effectively and efficiently. And those things end up passed down to us. And this can happen in a couple of different ways. It can happen through things like epigenetic changes, so literally changes to our DNA gene expression. But it can also happen through things like attachment wounds, right? So this is where our parents were not securely attached when they were infants and young children to their parents for whatever reason, that make it difficult for them to then offer us as babies and young children strong, healthy, happy, secure attachments, which then go on to affect really our whole lives until we do something about it. And in this way, we can start to have these cyclical patterns of family trauma that are passed down until one of us comes along, and these are the mamas I call radical mothers, and say, no way. Like this stops with me and I will not pass it down to my children, right? And that's the work that I help these radical mamas do.
Ah, I love it. And that is radical, beautifully radical, and a radical love. So let's back up to one point in everything you so beautifully shared, where you were talking about broken parenting or a broken attachment with a parent. And maybe for the purpose of this conversation, I'll focus on a broken attachment with mom, or breaking the bond. Some people refer to it as a mother wound. And you deal with radical moms that want to break cycles. So talk to me about some telltale signs or what a break in the bond with mom might mean.
Yeah, great question. So when we have these early attachment wounds, right? So let's talk about what attachment is a little bit first to sort of set the stage for this answer. So it's
Absolutely.
our primary caregiver, which is oftentimes mom. It's not always mom, but usually it is. Or at least I'll even go so far as to say ideally it is mom at a minimum. And what we want and what we need as babies and small children who are otherwise helpless and defenseless to the world is that we need a mama bear to protect us and to keep us safe. And that's what the role of the mother is supposed to be. What happens is that that isn't always the case. And for lots of different reasons, sometimes our mothers are either not in the picture at all, or if they're in the picture physically, they're not really there mentally or emotionally. And it can create situations where our needs are not met. And when those needs are not met, it can create insecure attachments where we don't really learn to trust people in the world. We don't have the ability to trust that we're going to be safe, that people are going to respond to our needs and our wants. You can think of a baby crying, right? For those of us who have kids, I mean, I hear a baby crying and I turn and orient to that baby, right? Instinctually. And that's what we want our mothers to do to us. And if that didn't happen, or it didn't happen predictably, or it happened with condition, which is what happens in a lot of cases, I will attend your needs if you do X, Y, or Z, then it can create this situation for us where we then grow up and we continue to feel unsafe in our relationships and in our attachments. So this can affect everything, right? So all of the relationships that we have in our lives, from coworkers to friends to romantic relationships to relationships that we have with our own children. And so when we don't have this secure sort of foundation, it interrupts our ability to be able to create that safe connection with others in our lives later when we need to. And so that can be one of the telltale signs, is that we have difficulty either forming or maintaining relationships with other people. And again, relationship being in the broad sense of the word, any sort of interaction with others. Did that answer the question? I got a little off there, so I may have missed what you asked, but
No,
I think I hit on it there.
I think you answered it in such a powerful way. And one of the things that I'm hearing you say is that how we bond with others is affected when we're an adult.
Yeah, absolutely. Because our initial bond that we have with that primary caregiver, right, with mom, or the person sort of playing the role of mom, sort of sets a blueprint in our psychological and energetic fields for what to expect from relationships everywhere else that we encounter them. And so if that blueprint is sort of laid down in such a way that we don't expect that other people are going to value our needs or respond to our needs, it can make it hard to expect that people are actually going to do that. We come to expect people to treat us poorly, for ourselves to treat ourselves poorly, right? Because we don't know any better. We think that that's what normal is, and we come to expect that, and we seek out situations that feel familiar in that way, even though they're not ultimately supportive of us. That familiarity really is attractive, even though it doesn't really rationally make sense.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's unconscious. I mean, when I like, just generally speaking, if you think of it's a trauma also, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
An unresolved trauma. But, even when you recognize you have emotional wounding or problems bonding with other humans, whether it be an intimate partner or family members or people in society, the first thing I don't think most people think, well, I've got to investigate or get inherited family trauma sessions going immediately, right? It's kind of a cutting edge sort of beautiful um, modality to think about looking into your family tree, or at least looking into early attachment parenting. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you're right. A lot of us don't walk around going, I wonder if the reason that I'm having so much trouble with my boss at work is because I have this inherited family trauma. I think what ends up often happening for women, especially if they become mothers, is that that's sort of a catalyst to step into this new role in our lives where our whole life is shaken up, and all of a sudden we're put in this position that our mothers were put in, caring for this helpless, defenseless small child. And that can often trigger in us these unresolved sort of wounds that we're carrying that, like you mentioned, are oftentimes subconscious, that we are not aware of. And children can really often be a catalyst for us to realize, wait a minute, either I deeply know that I do not want to parent in the way that I was raised, or we start doing it and then go, wait a minute, what, I don't recognize myself. I'm looking in the mirror. I don't know who this woman is staring back at me. Or I sound just like my mother, right? Or why are my kids triggering me in these ways? And these can all sort of be clues that there are these subconscious patterns that you are recreating and reliving and replicating for your children. And for a lot of us radical mothers who sort of have that awareness that this is going on, it's really this stop sign for us to start asking some deeper questions and starting to get curious about some of these family patterns so that we can do something about it, because the way that we're behaving is not a way that we want to be showing up as in the world. And it really gives us an opportunity to sort of check ourselves and go, is this what I want to be doing? Is this how I want to be treating my children? And then in that questioning, we get to make space to find different answers and find different ways of doing it.
Yeah, that is a powerful healing possibility. I mean, I'm going to also flip it out and give you another, example of breaking the bond with mother, because the role of mother is so foundational, so important to creating love bonds with others. And it's another scenario. Well, first of all, you know that I deal with many women who have had narcissistic husbands, and then we often look and then see that their mother or their father was narcissistic, or it's shown up somewhere in their family tree. It's usually not the first time. That's another way I would say a mother could be absent, empathy being absent. And then sometimes, you know, when a child feels like they have to take care of their mom, maybe their mom was, as you mentioned, emotionally unpresent or an alcoholic or depressed, then that mom now in her own world, or that woman as a grown-up, could feel permanently overwhelmed, like have a DNA print for just constantly being overwhelmed by life or constantly under supported. And these issues can also relate to how we manifest money, for example. Like, how does that sound? And what other examples can you give of telltale signs where we might want to check in with you about increasing our consciousness or our awareness to heal generational trauma?
Yeah, I mean, it can definitely show up as like over responsibility and sort of taking on other people's emotional baggage, right? Sort of carrying things for other people. It can be difficulty holding and maintaining boundaries, saying no, right? So people pleasing, sort of being the good girl, perfectionism, all of these, you know, it's not that any one of them necessarily points to inherited family trauma, but if you sort of have several of these, or if you know nothing else that you're doing is sort of explaining them, it can often point to that, right? One of the things that I see a lot of times in the mothers that I work with is that they will give. There's still this like deeply entrenched idea in our culture that a good mother is a good martyr. And I call BS on that, right? Because I know that that's not true. And that's why I say that they're radical mothers, because they're radically going against these modern mothering paradigms that tell us those things, right? And instead, we recognize that even though we may have seen our own mother martyr herself for the sake of her children, it really did this disservice to her and disservice to us, modeling how to show up in a healthy way. And so that can be another sort of red flag. Like if you are just wearing yourself to the bone at the end of every night and just feeling like you're never good enough, you're never worthy of a break, you're never worthy of rest, you're never worthy of having your own needs or wants met, again, these are all sort of pointing to those woundings that you have from childhood.
Yeah, I got goosebumps when you said that, Christa. Like, it's such, it's so important, the self-care and the self-compassion practice that we can open up for ourselves, because, being a mother is radical. And that's why I love your term. It calls for radical love, but it can be really tiring. And, I often feel that if you ever love someone from a place of like, I have to do this, you build resentment inside your own self.
Yeah. And the thing is that we spend so much time loving our children unconditionally that we completely forget to love ourselves.
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
And here's the thing. And this is the thing, is that it's the wish of mothers everywhere. It's universal to say that mothers wish that their children have better than they got themselves. And I like to make the argument, how are you supposed to give your kids better if you aren't modeling what better looks like? So if you're continuing to act the way that your mother did by martyring yourself and giving and giving and giving and giving, then that's exactly what you're teaching your kids to do. And so instead, we actually, part of the cycle that we can break is by saying, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to let my kids see that I'm overwhelmed, and then they're going to see me take a step back and take a pause and take a break, whether that's 5 minutes that you go and lock yourself in the bathroom and have a moment to take a deep breath, or it's a weekend away with girlfriends where you say, I'm stepping out of my mom role for 48 hours, right? Whatever it is, on whatever sort of spectrum that looks like, but taking those moments to really prioritize yourself and your own wellness and well-being then shows your kids and gives them permission to do the same thing. Otherwise, we're just perpetuating this cycle and saying, well, I want it to be different, but I'm going to keep doing the same thing. It's like, well, then nothing changes. You didn't actually break a cycle. You just acknowledged the cycle and then you perpetuated it. Let's do better.
I love it. Such a difference. We can say that there's little eyes watching us, but there's something to the apron, cutting the apron strings. There's some kind of like, special connection, like a cord, I would call it, between mom and child. Because I often feel like even if I'm doing the role of mom and I'm doing the dishes and I'm doing everything in my mom duties, even if I was depressed or sad or not feeling deeply empowered, it's like my daughters know. So I know that the more I can empower myself, it's like an energetic sort of transfer that that where that modeling happens. Just how do you feel about that
Absolutely.
concept?
I mean, kids are innately empathetic and they're innately able to read us like books, right? And so we can't hide anything from them. I think it's insulting to children to think that they don't know what's going on with us. And I think that we really, in order to respect and acknowledge them as these beautifully intelligent, autonomous beings, that we really take that into consideration. And, one of the things that I see happen so frequently is that, we'll get a mom who says, okay, I don't want to parent the way that I was raised. I want to do it differently. And my mother was never there for me. And I'm going to change that narrative. And what can often end up happening is that in an attempt to break the cycle that they dealt with, they almost let the pendulum swing too far in the opposite direction, right? And that doesn't do any good either. What we actually need is this sort of middle ground approach where it's okay for good enough parenting to actually be the ideal, where we can recognize that taking time to go out for a night to have dinner with a girlfriend is not going to break the bond of a securely attached mother-child partnership, right? It's, if you're doing it with self-awareness and you're showing up in all the other ways, you've created that secure attachment. It's designed to be able to handle you leaving for a night. Never taking care of yourself though, and having your self-worth be so entangled in your child's happiness and all of their needs, and being attended to 24/7 is actually creating a dysfunctional pattern in and of itself. We need this healthy balance. And sometimes I feel like we're afraid to recognize that it's okay for there to be some give and take between moms and children. And again, this is something that's a radical idea in our society, that women are allowed to do that. We have permission to exist as women outside of our role as just mom. That is okay.
Oh, I get such goosebumps when you say that too, because that is a radical self-permission to give. And you know what? We become better, more empowered, more mothers when we do it. And I personally find you become a happier mom. You just become a happier mom. Like, I love to hear the possibility of giving us that type of huge self-permission.
Mm-hmm.
We see a kind of cultural phenomenon in North America of helicopter parenting. Would that be sort of just over momming it?
Yeah. And it's, I think helicopter momming is also about not trusting your intuition and trusting your children's intuition and feeling like you need to be overly involved in your life. And again, it's this sort of pendulum swing in the opposite direction of parents that were completely detached and withdrawn and sort of out of the picture. We're talking about emotionally here, that we
Yes.
feel like in response to that, we need to be overly emotionally involved. And it's just as bad as, one extreme or the other. Neither of the extremes is healthy for anybody, let alone your kids or your, so I think that helicopter parenting is kind of the flip side of that coin of a generation of very emotionally distant and uninvolved parents.
Yeah, 100%. I always sort of think of helicopter parenting, as a good example of the pendulum swing. And it's kind of like a contraction instead of an expansion in the role of that relationship, mom-child relationship.
Yeah.
Let's switch gears a little bit, because I am curious, because I know that you heal and guide healing through inner child work. And I love to chat with you about inner child work, Christa.
Yeah. So inner child work is this idea of recognizing that, we exist in many parts, right? That we have different parts of ourselves. And one of those parts that we sort of carry around with us is this idea, this kind of concept of our inner child. And this is both the part of ourselves that loves to just be sort of like a playful, free spirit with no responsibilities, that can just engage in the wonder of the world, right? I think of my 3-year-old son just being enamored by a mud puddle, right? This sort of like sense of awe. But it can also be the part of ourselves that as children didn't have our needs met. The part of us that was wounded by either our parents or other people in our lives, where we sort of still carry those wounds. And what can happen is that we can sometimes respond to events in our current life from this place of a wounded child. And this can often sort of show up in relationships where we'll sort of do something or say something or respond in a way that almost feels like this kind of out of body experience, like I didn't mean that, or I was completely overreacting. And we can kind of recognize that it doesn't feel like our authentic self, but yet we still behaved in that way. And oftentimes it can come from this place of wounded inner child that is being triggered by a situation that's similar to something that happened to us when we were younger. And so what we can do is we can sort of befriend that part of ourselves and work with it and honor it and respect it and validate it, just like we would our actual real living children, right? I like to think of it as sort of the way that we speak to ourselves, the way that we interact, our sort of self-talk is often negative. It's not healthy. And a lot of that, I sort of challenge people, like, is the way that you're speaking to yourself the way that you would ever speak to a child? And the answer is almost always, of course, no. And so when we can start to sort of look at that relationship that we have to ourselves and hold ourselves with a little bit more compassion and loving tenderness, it can really go a long way.
That's powerful, Christa. Thank you for that. what are some other ways we can tend to the inner child that wants to have a seat at the table? For a lot of years, my inner child was making a lot of decisions and driving the bus, and I just had no idea. I didn't have any awareness towards that. So if one were to invite the inner child just to come play or have a seat at the table to talk, or just started to build awareness to talk to that part of ourselves that's still alive, what are the gifts in doing that?
Yeah, so this kind of connects back to the part of the conversation we were having about martyring ourselves in motherhood, right? Because when we are constantly in this state of go, 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 do, and we feel like we have to be on all the time for the sake of others, for the sake of people pleasing or being the good girl or martyring ourselves to our children, what we do is we take all the air out of our inner child. We don't leave any space for them. And just like regular children can sort of, get a little grumpy when they don't get to have their way ever, so can our inner child. And so one of the ways that we can cultivate a relationship with that part of ourselves is allowing ourselves to have downtime, allowing ourselves to have space for creative exploration, allowing ourselves to have space for unstructured time so that we can sit and be in the beauty and the awe and the wonder of the world with the same sort of rapture as a child would. But what happens is that we're so busy having to be productive, going from thing to thing, that we take all of those sort of spaces for our inner child to express themselves out of the equation. We can't just sit and be with the beauty of a flower the way that my son can, because we're thinking about the email that we didn't answer yet, or we're thinking about the phone call we have to return, or the groceries we need to buy, right? And instead, if we can actually sort of take that breath and that pause and make space, then we can sit with our children, we can sit with our inner child, and we can allow that to shine so that our inner child doesn't end up being bratty running the show later, right? It sort of gets a little attention, and then it can kind of be, placated for a while. Yeah. And then we can keep going on with our adult lives. But I think we need to make space for that to exist.
That's beautiful. And it also sounds to me very similar to like inviting a space of mindfulness, because what you described also sounded like just becoming very mindful so you can be alive in a present moment.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and mindfulness is another thing that we always, a lot of us say, oh yeah, that sounds nice. I don't have time for that. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. Well, at this point, what do you feel would be something else that would be really relevant to bring to the conversation that you'd like our audience to benefit from, or that would have value for them around mothering, inner child work, or child trauma, or where should we go next?
I mean, the one thing that we haven't touched on yet is the role of nervous system regulation in all of this. So I think that's a really important piece of the conversation, especially if you are dealing with unresolved childhood trauma. I think that nervous system regulation is one of the ways that you can help to resolve that in your body and really improve your quality of life, both for yourself and also for your kids, and really for all of the relationships that you interact with in your life. So I think that's probably one of the key pieces that I work with clients on. I see a lot of moms sort of coming to me in this state of dysregulation that looks like reactivity, whether that's yelling at their children, being sort of like easy to pop off with their partner, or the opposite, which is sort of depressed or feeling like you're not really, you're sort of going through the motions of life, but you're not really fully engaged. You're not really participating. Or you're sort of oscillating back and forth. You're sort of bouncing from one extreme to the next. And I think that a lot of that comes from these attachment wounds and dysregulated parents that didn't teach us effectively how to self-regulate. And so then we have difficulty doing that as adults. And I think it's one of the most foundational skills that cycle breakers can learn to really start to shift the trajectory of their family lineage.
That's really interesting to me, because I acknowledge the importance of regulating our nervous system and nurturing our nervous system and calming our nervous system with, beautiful things like mindfulness. But I hadn't really thought of it in terms of inherited family trauma. So how do we become aware that we might need to give some love to our nervous system? Like, what would be some signs? And maybe you could define what a calmed nervous system might feel like or look like.
Yeah. So one of the ways that you can one of the red flags that you can use to sort of identify that you're existing in a state of dysregulation is when you have um, disproportionate reactions to an event, right? So if somebody cuts you off in traffic and you're screaming and swearing and honking the horn, right? It's like, oh,
We
go
see
ahead.
that a lot. Yeah.
Right. I mean, is it frustrating when someone cuts you off in traffic? Absolutely. Do you need to flip them off? Probably not. That's probably not going to do much good, right? It could be that your partner comes home from the end of the day and you immediately, like, they leave their shoes in the middle of the floor and you start screaming at them, right? It's like, have you asked them to put their shoes in the closet? Sure. Is it annoying that they didn't do that? Sure. Does it deserve them being screamed at? No, probably not. Or things with our kids. Our kids do something and then we're yelling at them, or we're, just these sort of like big reactions. The other thing that can happen is that something happens, a stressful situation will come up in life. It could be anything, right? And it'll incapacitate you for longer than it needs to, longer than it should, right? We all have things that happen to us that make us sad or tired or unhappy or depressed momentarily. Those are all, human responses to things. But it shouldn't leave us feeling like we want to hide from our life for a day, for 2 days, for a week, for a month on end, right? So some of these are red flags that we're living in this state of dysregulation. And on the opposite side of that is when we're living in a place of regulation, where we're able to have stressful events happen in our life and we're able to handle it sort of bending and not breaking. We're able to sort of roll with the punches. We're able to say, yeah, that was a crappy thing that happened and I'm really upset about it and I'm going to take a deep breath and I'm going to be okay. Right? It's that capacity in our body to feel safe and secure and connected enough to be able to have the inevitable stress of life flare up. And so when we aren't living in that place, life is a lot harder. It makes parenting harder. It makes being married harder. It makes everything harder. And so we want to get to this place of recognizing, not that we're never triggered, but it's about how we respond to those triggers and sort of the duration of that trigger in our system. And we want to get that into a more manageable level so that life is easier. It doesn't have to be so hard. You don't have to be screaming at your kids all the time. You don't have to constantly be feeling like you don't have any energy, that you're just moving through the motions of your day. It doesn't have to be that way.
That's very hopeful, because I think a lot of women do feel that way. I kept getting a vision of when you were saying about those shoes, of a woman just crying, like breaking out in tears and crying.
Exactly.
Because their house isn't perfect, or
right.
their car's a mess, or whatever. So I'm curious, do you have like one example of how one might calm their nervous system today, or just as one little baby step to stepping into a more calm nervous system?
Yeah. So a really quick, easy hack is just being mindful of your breath and taking a breath where your exhale is intentionally longer than your inhale. Right? So breathing in and then breathing out.
Oh, that's so cool. That's almost like how you breathe when you're in labor.
Yeah, right? And what it's doing is it's working on a physiological level to send a signal of safety through the vagus nerve to your brain that your body is safe. And safety is really on a sort of, in the language of the nervous system, is what it means to be in that calm state. Right. And so that just noticing, like, how am I breathing? How am I holding my breath? How is the breath moving in and out of my body? And then doing some of those intentional long exhales can do a lot in the moment.
That's fantastic. It's a fantastic biohack that can help any woman today.
Yes.
This has been so valuable. I love what's emerged in this conversation. We're getting up to a closing time here, and I wanted to invite you, Christa, to, if I could say to you, what is one closing message that you'd like to say to a radical mama out there on planet Earth? What might that be?
You are not alone. It feels really, really lonely to be doing this work because you are often the only one in your family doing it, right? And that can really make you question your sanity and question if other people are doing this and question if it's possible. And the answer is yes, they are. And yes, it is. And it is better in community with other radical mamas who understand and who get it. And they exist.
Thank you for that. I acknowledge you. I acknowledge that's very empowering, and I felt it. So thank you. Thanks for sharing your time. Christa, if women would like to reach out and connect with you, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Well, I have a virtual village for radical mothers called the Radical Mother Village. And so you can find that on Facebook. If you type that in, it'll pop right up. And that's exactly what we're doing, is creating space for all those mamas who feel alone, that are walking this path, healing their trauma and doing things differently for themselves and for their kiddos.
Yeah. Noble. A huge expansion. Radical Mothers Village.
The Radical Mother Village.
The Radical Mother Village on
Yes.
Facebook. Okay. Yes. Fantastic. At that, I want to thank everyone for joining us on the Healing Broken Families podcast. Thank you, Christa, and wishing everyone healing expansion today. Until next time, I'm Barbara LaPointe. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for being here, for supporting the Healing Broken Families podcast and being part of this amazing healing community. I'm Barbara LaPointe, a solution-focused life coach, divorce coach, and conflict resolution specialist. But I am so passionate about your awakening. I am passionate and so excited to welcome you to your own divorce awakening, to your own spiritual and soul awakening, because all is well. You know what? We are empowered to heal. We are empowered to heal. And your divorce, difficult, high conflict relationship, parental alienation, all of these things you will come to see them as a gift. You will come to see everything as a beautiful gift. So embrace the conflict, embrace the struggle, embrace the wound. I invite you now to please go to my website, barbaralapointe.com. There are many free resources there for you, but a great place to start is download my ebook, Erased by a Narcissist, and then book yourself a free complimentary consult or connection discovery call. I will serve and coach you powerfully for an hour. Also, I invite you now to subscribe to my YouTube channel, make comments on these videos. I ask all of my expert guests to make themselves available to you and also comment your questions, your pain, your problems, and your thoughts, your opinions, your concerns. I truly, truly believe that we heal in community, and I welcome you to my community. So I'm sending you a lot of love and blessings. I've come to know that when you go through divorce, you truly need to be resourceful, strong, and supported. So it's an honor to walk this journey with you. Welcome to your awakening, and welcome to your deepest